up and running. We're having some connectivity problems, but I think we will survive. What's happening, everybody? If everybody's having a fantastic whatever day you're watching this, talking bikes on this one. So typically I'd be talking about, we're doing a little bit different format now on Tuesdays. We got the Two Wheel Tuesday thing going. So going to be talking more about bikes now. Save the car stuff for the weekends, but guys, I got to tell you, my first love was always motorcycles. I've been around them the longest. I've been involved with bikes the longest. So I got a little something to say about a little bit of all the different kinds of bikes. One of the things about me when it comes to motorcycles in general is I'm one of the types of guys that I've never met a motorcycle that I didn't like. I just had fun with every single one that I've ever thrown a leg over. And I don't try to get too wrapped up in some of the, what's the best way for me to put this? I don't like getting into the size queen of power and which one is better because of some whatever. It's as long as you're on two wheels, guys, I think it's great and I'm loving it. So talk about pretty much whatever you want to on this show. And I'll talk about my bike since that's what's going to kick us off. Currently in the inventory, we are rocking a Triumph T595. That's a 955cc triple from 1998. We've got a Triumph Thunderbird, which is the problem child right now. It's a T-Bird 1600, and it's got problems just in general. Let's leave it at that. It's a Triumph after all. DM, what is up? Good seeing you. Oh, got the bald guy with the shades on a Moto chat. Good. No, next in the inventory is my my Triumph Bonneville T120. Absolutely love that thing. And then currently the Katana. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Katana and bikes like it. We can talk about the Retro, the Neo Retro, and other bikes that are coming as well. So if you've got some bikes that you want to talk about, fill me in. In fact, you may be educating me as much as you know, I'm going to be hanging out with you. So let's do this. Sam Zan said, hey, B, took a direct from Milton, just got powered. Damn, my man. Sam, I'm sorry to hear that. Talk about I miss my Honda Big Red. Big Reds were sweet back in the day. Those were those big three-wheelers. Gary is in from Sacktown. I love it. So one of the things with me with bikes, we can talk about the different genres, right? But there's a lot of mix-up right now going on in the sport bike class. And this is a part where, well, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. My entire adult life has been centered around sport bikes of some kind over the course of years with some pauses here and there. But for the most part, that's what my motorcycling background is. Bikes that I have had, CBR 600. One of the bikes that I rode in college was actually a CBR 600 Hurricane, if you can believe that. But RC51, my track bike, GSXR 750, I've ridden everything from Harleys to Ducatis. I mean, everything in between, I've had an opportunity to play with. And all of them, I've really enjoyed the most. For whatever reason it is, the new stuff that I get to play with. It's not, and when I say new, I mean just something different. If you were to put me on a 1977 CB750, I would think that that's the greatest bike that's ever been made. And then you could put me on something ridiculous, like a GSXR 1000, and I'd be like, this is the best bike. That's the way that I feel about these things. Such an endorphin rush, I guess. But with that being said, sport bikes right now are really weird. And the nomenclature is something that is kind of interesting to me. And the way that it was explained to me by one of the regional managers with Triumph was when we're talking about sport bikes, we're not talking about the CBR 600. We're not talking about the R6. We're not talking about, the ZX6 anymore. When we talk sport bikes, if you're talking to the folks that are in the business, so to speak, get some conditioned air going here. Sport bike to them is now looking more like an A2 class bike. And that is kind of a weird thing. It's the what is the class now? Sport bike, I think. You got sport bike and then super sport, but super sport is really, I've heard it referred to as hyper sport now. Only because it is a hyper sport bike. And it's kind of one of these things where hyper sport used to mean one thing, and now as I've heard people from different dealerships and in different positions, not just the sales guy or the mechanics, we're talking like management level guys, when they're talking about these things, they use these types of terminology that, you know, you start to go, oh, I see what you're driving at. Okay, I see what, okay, so sport bike is really just the A2 compliant sub 100 bikes. In other words, they're derived from a sport naked, but they're kind of sporty in nature, where super sport would be what you would normally consider the 600cc super sport class. But now that's starting to encompass so many different bikes. Even the 955 Panigale is getting a piece of that. GSXR 750, and soon to be the R9 and RCR. So I don't know what you call them anymore. Again, words and phrases and names can kind of evolve over time, but I've heard the high revving middleweights referred to as hypersport when folks are talking about, well, what wasn't selling. And that's really more the point. For you fans out there of the super sport class, in other words, the middleweight, high winding motorcycles, they've fallen out of favor globally. And not necessarily in the States per se, but globally they've fallen out of favor. And I hate to say it, but manufacturers consider them a hyper sports class. So much so that they're trying to almost distance themselves in terms of product placement. It's all just the sport bikes, and they're selling like hotcakes. It's amazing. But let me check in with you guys real quick. DM saying, I like all the bikes too. There's one for everyone. Absolutely there is. Goldfish is in saying, wow. Well, wow, Goldfish. Wow. Sam saying, I'm probably the only person you'll meet that fell off a YZF 50 as a teenager. I fell off of one as an adult. You ever heard of Whiskey 50s? Yeah. Anyway, Goldfish saying, do you think Honda will bring the new CBR 600 to the States? They would be a fool not to. The United States is the last bastion of hope for any of the high winding super sport motorcycles. Call them what you will. I will keep calling them hyper sport, even though I've been kind of scolded a little bit for doing that, because that's in essence how they were described and how they were presented to me. Now that there are other motorcycles in the sport bike class. Sam said, YZF50 was kind of a hold my beer moment. I understand. Gary's saying, seems like resale Harleys have taken a hit. 2003 anniversary Super Glide rated at about an 8. Chrome package, 25,000 miles clean. What's about the worth? Okay, so Gary, I'll put it to you like this. I don't know the exact worth of that bike, but I'll put it to you in polite terms. I would probably not be a player on that bike for more than about $4,000. The reason for that, it's 20 years old, it's a Harley, and there are a boatload of very inexpensive later model Harleys than that for sale. I wouldn't say that it's worth less than $4,000. I think any Harley Davidson, if it's running and it's clean, you're saying it's about an 8 out of 10. I would say $4,000 would be the most I would want to pay. I would really not want to get suckered into $4,500 on this. Let me tell you why. Anytime you get to this level on the bike, this 20-ish year run, you have got every service that you can service on the bike that is going to have to be completed. I don't mean this, you don't have to worry about a radiator on this bike, but oil change, a new belt, new tires. You're going to need to look at brake lines. You're going to need to look at brake fluid. You're going to need to look at brake pads. Hell, you might even have to rebuild a couple of calipers on this thing. fork seals. There's everything that can leak will need to get dealt with. And that's why for me, what you're looking at with this '03 Harley is kind of the same thing I was looking at with my T595. Don't expect to come into this conversation without having at least a couple of $1,000s of a war chest ready to go to take care of the maintenance items that you're going to need to get that bike ready and really fit to hit the road. The first thing I would do is make sure everything is functioning, oil change, brake fluid for sure, give the brake system a good once over, and then throw a good set of tires on it should it need it. Skids is in. What is up, man? But getting back to the sport bike thing, the weird thing about it for me is just the cool thing, I should say, not weird. It's actually really cool. And this is why I like motorcycles and why there's a different emotion that I get with bikes above and beyond cars. Cars, man, they take up a lot of room. They're expensiver. Just in general, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of things you can hide on a car. Matter of fact, I was looking at a Challenger today, a white 1970 Challenger. Everybody goes gaga over these things. It's a 318 car, and they're wanting $40,000 for it. I can promise you that thing is a Bondo job. It's going to be great looking from 20 feet away, but it's going to be a nightmare to deal with. So. I like motorcycles because they always seem to be a bit more honest in a lot of ways. But more to all of that point, they're so diverse, and there is a seat for every ass and an ass for every seat, and everybody will have some kind of way that they can argue that theirs is the absolute best, which I think is phenomenal. But there's so many different brands. It's not like cars here in the United States. We really only have 3 or 4, maybe 5 brands that people really get excited about. You've got the Mopar, the Ford, the Chevy guys, the Mercedes, and the BMW guys, and then somewhere nestled in there, you might have, a Supra guy or something like that. Maybe a Nissan if you're into that sort of thing. The import deal, and that's really all you've got. Whereas motorcycles, you've got all manners of different bikes that are out there from all kinds of different and varied manufacturing lands, and they're all accepted as the same, which is something else that I really like. Sam's liking the Monkey. Monkeys are real popular right now, but in my opinion, monkeys are a little overpriced. You are paying for your nostalgia. Gary saying, thank you. Yes. Sam saying, made it through the storm. Very good. But, so getting back to it, the sport bike thing right now to me is really interesting because sport bike means a whole lot different now to a lot of folks. The guys that are buying sport bikes now are, at least the type of bikes they're buying, they're not as it doesn't seem like anyway, they're as adventurous. I've talked to a few of these guys at the dealership, and you've got things that are really more, when I say things of bikes, you've got bikes that are really more along the lines of a nice way to get into a sporting experience. And it's kind of weird because I look at this and clearly I am of a certain age. My background would have been, what's the fastest, what's the most kick-ass 600 I can get my hands on? Or what's the most durable? And it was always on the used market, right? Because we couldn't afford new ones. But the thing is that we would immediately be acting a fool on these bikes because they kind of goaded you into it. These are still motorcycles that would rev to 12, 13,000 RPM. Well, now a lot of these new sport bikes are a little bit shy in their power production, but they're all very tuned and very geared to mid-range and mid-throttle acceleration. And in saying that, you also have to admit they are emphatic on the top end. The Daytona 660 that I was riding, that bike was a phenomenal bike. In fact, I'm kind of a fan of that class of bike just because of what it represents to a lot of folks. It's not very intimidating. It looks intimidating, but it's friendly, and it's something that looks the part, but it's not gonna act the part. Whereas something along the lines of an R6, GSX-R 600, ZX6, CBR 600, the real hyper sports bikes in that class, they're pretty freaking nasty by comparison. I mean, there's really no comparison at all when you consider that, man, just a couple of decades ago, these regular sport bikes would have been fairly normal power output for a 600 sport bike. Whereas the other class of super sport bike, 120 plus horsepower, I mean, that was GSX-R 750 territory. That was big boy territory. And so, you can see that, well, a lot of folks would just stay away from them. Anyway, long story dragging on here about this. The guys that were explaining that class of bike to me were describing them as hyper sports, and they were saying that they just don't sell, and that's why we have this new regular sport bike class. Again, extremely diverse, and for you guys that might be interested in them, I gotta say this, my experience with those bikes has been positive across the board. I can tell you that the Daytona 660 of the group is going to have more punch than most, but the GSX 8R is going to be the better street bike out of all of them just because of the torque that they make. So, Skids, CF Moto. CF Moto is in, and they're coming in strong with that 675. Sam saying the eye came ashore 8 miles from his door. Damn. Oh yeah, Skids, the big four, man. Well, you got to remember, okay, so my big thing with bikes, if we're talking about sport bikes, there isn't really anybody else for a lot of folks other than the big four Japanese manufacturers. Many times people forget that Ducati exists. They'll forget about MV Agusta, BMW, Aprilia. They'll forget about those brands because, well, for one thing, out of sight, out of mind. That's not the bike that you see every day, and they're considered to be extremely expensive for what you get in terms of actual performance. So for the guys that, that are going to take part in that upper echelon, and Triumph on some level can kind of sort of be included in this, but in different areas. For the guys that are going to take part in that, they had never considered a Japanese motorcycle. And so, I don't know, it's really weird for me growing up. These other manufacturers, they all seemed kind of, I don't know what it was. It's kind of a weird mental thing for me, but any of the Euro bikes always seemed a bit stodgy. I don't know why that is. I always felt like the Japanese bikes always were a lot more youthful. And a lot of that probably had to do with the fact that, well, that's what my dad raced. That's what everybody in my family had. We're all Japanese bikes. And you could just get so much more performance for the dollar that you were going to be spending. So, let's see. Skids is hanging out with Sam. Yeah, I don't think you'd want 3 people on a bike. Well, I guess technically you could put 2 on the bike and 1 in the sidecar. Skid saying, I always wondered why the GSX-R 750, like the others, didn't think it was necessary for an in-between 600 and 1,000, but Suzuki is different for sure. So Suzuki will not let the GSX-R 750 die, and a lot of this has to do with the history of that motorcycle. The GSX-R 750, when it was released back in mid-80s, that bike ushered in what we would now consider to be the modern sport bike. The full fairing, the look of a GSX-R 750 would not be out of place today, aside from styling, but retro seems to still be a thing. But without the GSX-R 750, we don't have the GSXR 1000 that we have today. We don't have the CBR 1000. We don't have all of those bikes. Now, what's weird is that when, what was it, World Superbike? When you had the 1000cc twins versus the 750cc bikes, and you had the R7, the original R7 was part of that. Honda fielded the RC51. That was an interesting point in time, but the GSXR 750 ruled the roost with that. That motorcycle, more than any, is a legacy motorcycle. And what's weird about the GSXR 750 that a lot of folks kind of seem to forget is that it is the most retro motorcycle in anybody's lineup. And the reason why I say that is because it has run unchanged for decades at a time. And in fact, if you go to look at a GSXR 750 now, you've got a small LCD screen with a big analog tack right in your face. I mean, it is super cool that you still have that type of motorcycle available. And because it's only costing you about $13,500 to get arguably the absolute best overall sport bike that's ever been made, man, I gotta tell you, okay, so the thumbnail for this video is my Katana, and it's, by the way, my Katana not long after I had bought it, and it still has the real high handlebars on it that I had rocked as far forward as I could get them. Anyway, the point that I'm getting here is my Katana feels a lot like my GSXR 750 from an acceleration point of view. The Katana is a little bit heavier. It's making quite a bit more horsepower, but the GSXR 750 was more aggressively geared. But again, that's the bike that I had all my track experience with, and I got to tell you, for generic street hoonery, or squiddly activities, I should say, and as a track weapon that was practically indestructible, man, it is tough to beat that bike. But it is a true legacy motorcycle. And you know, it's funny, of all the retros that are out there, if you just went and bought a GSXR 750, you'd be buying a retro motorcycle, as weird as it is. Or if you bought the GSX-S family of motorcycles from Suzuki. Here's another fun fact about those bikes. Suzuki is really good about recycling. So the GSX-S, like my Katana, the GSX-S 1000, you've got the F model, which was fully fair, the GT, there's another, anyway. The frame, the swing arm, and the engine are all circa 2005. They're practically 20 years old already. So here's the irony with my Katana, or the funny thing, or whatever you want to call it about the Katana. It is a retro-themed bike that is built on a retro chassis with a retro swing arm and a retro engine. But it's a modern bike. I don't know how, it's just so funny. That's one of the reasons why, to me, I was thinking, God, you know, I not really buyer's remorse, but I was thinking, man, I really need to get a GSXR 1000. I am kind of a Suzuki simp. I didn't really like, for whatever, I just could not fall in love with the Speed Triple Double R. I know that bike gets a lot of love. I could not gel with that thing for whatever reason. And it's fast. I mean, it's got really good torque. It's got more torque than you might think. I mean, it's a punchier bike than you might think, but that's part of its charm, but it's also part of what makes it, eh. And then there was the Aprilia, you know, and I got to tell you, either the Tuono or just the RSV4, either way, that was an option, and it still is, but I don't know if I want to deal with Italian motorcycle problems. Anyway, love me some Suzuki, so. Oh, Sam's checking back in. Good to see you got power back. DM saying, I'm 54 years old. I grew up with thumpers and twins, but when I first heard the GSXR 750 in high school, I was hooked. Like a V8, that sound and tone speaks to me. Since then, the RSV hits me too. Yeah, the RSV4, for me, here's the thing about the RSV4 that I really, really like, And this is one of the things that I'm just kind of going, crap, if I get another bike, what's it going to be? The thing about the RSV4 is this. All you have to do with that bike is put a slip-on exhaust if you want it to sound differently. And that's it. Don't need to tune it. It's already making a boatload of power. And the tune on it is really good to begin with. It's got all the drive modes. You can customize that thing to be as rowdy as or as calm as you like. But the main thing with that bike is that it's got the suspension. It's got everything already done. If you want something that is going to be really a no compromises track weapon, something you can take to the track, really enjoy back roads, things like that. The one thing that concerns me about the RSV though is, will it be able to manage that long term the way that the Suzukis, the Yamahas, the Hondas, the Cowies can? I don't know. And as great as that bike is, I would hate for it to be like a May to December relationship, because that's one of those things where once you get a taste of a bike like that, you're screwed for the rest of your life if you're into those types of motorcycles and that type of riding. So for me, damn it. Anyway, I RSV4 is always going to be at the top of the list. GSX-R 750, if one of them were to just got dumped out in front of the garage, I would probably have to adopt it myself. But at the top of the list, man, I got to tell you right now, as far as the leader class bikes go, it's GSX-R 1000. The reason why I say that is Gixxer simp. Yeah, well, yeah, a little bit, because my experience with Suzuki has been exceptionally positive. Honda, for the most part, too. Really, all the Japanese manufacturers. But the reason why I like the GSX-R 1000 so much is that it is comfortable for more average-sized guys. What I've found is when you start looking at the CBR 1000, especially the double RR, the Pirate Edition, that bike is designed for guys that are very small. That bike is designed for guys that are like 5'5" to 5'8". Like, in fact, if you're any taller than 5'9", depending on how you're built, that bike's going to be pretty uncomfortable. So the GSX-R 1000 for me is just the most comfortable, and it is incredibly, in terms of power, it punches. Suzuki's do one thing exceptionally well, and that is that they punch way above their weight class when it comes to making power. And the GSX-S variants are no different than the new GSX-R 1000 in that respect. DM's talking about the ducks taking more. You got to have a specialized mechanic to work on it for sure. The good thing about Ducati, though, is that they've come a long way. Valve adjustments and things like that are a lot fewer and further between than what they used to be. In general, the Ducatis of late, from what I've seen, have been pretty tough. But you're right. And when you go to get them worked on, about the only manufacturer that'll get you a little bit better than them are BMW. Oh, Skids, yeah, Honda's making V4 bikes for MotoGP, but not for sale. I know, there's got to be some homologation there, doesn't it? Sounds like in the CB 160. Not familiar with that one. Skid saying, good point. I live at about 30 miles east of Dallas. That, and when I go in an extended ride, I have Austin, San Antonio, or Houston areas all have experienced mechanics if necessary. And DM saying, Honda owns about every patent there is for a motorcycle. They make an amazing V4, but it need MotoGP money to be able to afford it, for sure. I'd like to get one too. Yeah, I think you're right about that. The RSV's, Skid saying the RSV, I wouldn't worry too much about the reliability. I think you're probably right about that. But there's always going to be a little bit of a tentativeness there. But yeah, I mean, the RSV4, as far as value for money is incredibly difficult to beat. Oh, and that's another thing. That bike is also very comfortable by comparison to some of the other bikes that are out there, with the exception of MV Agusta. Yeah. Yeah, DM, the RSV4, 26,000 miles. Can't leave it out in the cold. No, if they're cold, you're cold, right? Remember that one? So if you guys don't remember what he's talking about, I had last year? It got crazy cold for down here anyway. It was like 20 degrees or 18 degrees. So I brought all the bikes into the office and had the heater going. Oh, DM, yeah, the Gixxer 1000, very tough bike to beat. Here's the cool thing about the GSXR 1000 that a lot of folks don't realize. The GSXR 1000 makes torque. Suzuki's do this, and it's a Suzuki thing. But we're talking about GSXR 1000, but this can apply to any of the Zooks. They are incredibly docile and they make really good torque down low, and you can ride it like a flipping standard motorcycle if you wanted to. They're just that good. RSV4 is very much in the same respect as that. A lot of these newer large displacement hyper sports bikes, and I say hyper sports because they're legit, like they're above super sport. Speed Triple, which is a 1200, RSV4, which is an 1100. The GSXR 1000 rides like those bikes do. And there's no denying how eerie it is when you can ride something. I mean, my Katana is a lot like this. It's incredibly docile at low speeds, and you'll be fooled into thinking everything. You won't realize what's about to happen until you get that thing north of about 7,500 RPM, and then its whole disposition changes. It's just that my bike will rev to just shy of 12,000 RPM. The GSXR 1000 and the rest of the leader class bikes are all like 13 plus. Panigale V4 is about every 15,000. Panigale V4 is a good bike too. But sport bikes aside, Skids, I was kind of sad to see the SV650 go. That should never happen. That was a great competitor to the Monster. It had a great sound, fun bike. At least Suzuki came up with a P-Twin with a 270. Yeah. The Gixxator. Yeah, that's the bike that basically took its place. And unfortunately, the big downside to the SV650 going away, and I understand why they did it. The GSX-8R is, by all metrics, a better bike. But here's the thing. You're never going to see a Scrambler GSX-8R. You're never going to see a Cafe Racer GSX-8R. You're never going to see, the standard that it is, GSX-8R. The 650, guys would make motards out of that. The 650 was literally a do-everything bike. You could do off-road stuff with it. You could do on-road, and you could build it to do it. That's the thing. That's why I was saying you're not going to see you won't see people do stuff with the GSX-8R the way that you would see people go, oh shit. Let me remind you something about the SV650. Okay, so the very first ever lap that I took at Thunder Hill, the very, very first lap that I took, I come out of the pits, which is on the front straight. We're doing one of the short courses, and you have turn 1. It's a long, sweeping left-hander. Turn 2 is a right-hander. Turn 3 goes back left. Turn 4 comes up. Turn 5 comes down and goes back to the right. I can go over that track. I can close my eyes and literally ride, still to this day, most of that track. I come out, front straight, get a warm-up lap in. I'm feeling pretty froggy, keeping in mind that I've been squidding since forever. This is my first time on this track, but I'm thinking, look, I've got this track on lock for whatever reason. I am jiving with this. It's going to be great. Get through turn 11, get back onto the front straight, and I'm at about about bottom third in B group. And I'm not really flogging it. I'm just kind of playing around, just basically tail gunning whoever I was in back of, getting ready to hit that turn 1. So I wasn't flogging it on the straight, just getting ready to hit turn 1. And I go to set the bike up, and I get this girl with a hole in the back of her helmet, it looked like anyway, with her ponytail hanging out, coming around me on the outside on this clapped out SV650. She's got this thing over on the side of the tire, dragging me, and this bike is pinned through the corner. Goes around me and the guy that's in front of me, and then makes that quick right, which is turn 2. That's when I knew that I'd done gone and screwed up, and that I'd better polish up my skill set quick, because I just had some dude's girlfriend clown me on turn 1. So anyway, that was my first lap. Things got a lot better from there, but it taught me a fun lesson, and that is, dude, 650s are track weapons as much as they are everything else. SV650, legendary bike, yes. SV was a Suzuki's Do Anything bike. So yeah, I really like those bikes a lot, and I would, if you need a bike to just have a motorcycle on hand, just to, run errands, to take out, if you get bored and you want to ride something, that's a great bike to have in the garage just to go for a motorcycle ride. But, so sport bikes aside, and by the way, tonight's show is just real flowy. I didn't do any, no monologue, no nothing like that. We'll get to that point eventually, but right now I just want to hang out with you guys and talk about bikes. So, as far as standards go, as far as any news is concerned, I don't know if you guys have seen it yet. Have you seen it? Have you heard about it? Have you seen this yet? The new Hornet 1000. And there's also, I think, a Hornet 750. Sign of things to come. If you haven't seen the Hornet 1000 and the Hornet 1000 SP, you might want to start taking a look at this bike. It's a little on the heavy side. I'm just going to put that out there to begin with. But it's going to take the place of the CB 1000. CB 1000, single-sided swing arm, had the retro round headlight. It's rated at 150 horsepower, but the real number was more like 140. Not necessarily maligned, but it was just a bike that never really took off. In fact, at one of the dealerships I was at recently, they have a CB 1000. They're probably willing to let it go for dirt cheap because they've had it since forever. Nobody really wants it. But here's the thing. DM, thank you very much, man. I appreciate that. Saying cheers to the first Two Wheel Tuesday. Thank you. Hopefully one of many, 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 many to come. And that is the new format, is we're going to be doing Two Wheel Tuesdays moving forward. But thank you so much, man. I appreciate the support, brother. Very, very much. The CB, the Hornet 1000 and the Hornet 1000 SP, 150 horsepower, and they're calling it legit. I think it's more like 147. But the SP is at 155, or at least just shy of it. And it's actually got a different tune in it. Like, there's a different tune working here. It's not just some suspension bits. The bike looks good too. It's a proper modern looking sport naked bike that's making proper leader class sport naked power. Now we'll see if this actually does pan out. Lately, what I've found is, well, there's not a lot of truth in some of the claimed power numbers. Oh, and by the way, for motorcycles, there is a universal constant, it seems like, for catching the right number. If you have a rear wheel horsepower number what that thing is going to make at the flywheel. Just divide your rear wheel horsepower number by 0.865, and that will get you, for about 90% of the motorcycles, it'll get you about 95% of the way there in terms of giving you an accurate representation of what that engine's making at the flywheel in real terms. If you're given a number, then just multiply by 0.865, and that'll give you approximate rear wheel horsepower number. And that seems to be a pretty good conversion for motorcycles as it sits. If you see a bike falling outside of that range, then you'll know it's either been overrated or underrated somehow by the factories. At least what I've found anyway. But thank you very much, DM. I appreciate that so much. But check out the Hornet 1000. Pretty sweet bike coming from Honda when you look at it from the point of view of, well, it's a motorcycle, it's a leader bike, it's a sport naked, but it at least will give the GSX S1000 maybe a run for its money, at least in terms of acceleration. And it is powered by an engine that's derived from one of the old Fireblade engines. So, I mean, it's a page right out of Suzuki's handbook. I don't see how they could get it wrong, to be honest. But with that, we've also got some newer bikes coming in from Triumph. You've got some rebodied Speed Twins at the 900s, which is looking to be pretty cool. If you're into that sort of motorcycle, I know that the retro theme bikes have fallen a little bit out of favor. And I get that, but here's the thing. True retros are still selling like crazy. So you've got Triumph and Royal Enfield are they going to be the first ones that are going to come to mind, and they are doing a hell of a good job moving motorcycles. The other one, which may or may not come immediately to mind, is Harley Davidson. You talk about building retro motorcycles, they're all legacy bikes. If you walk into a Harley dealership, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, that's how it is. And speaking of Harley, I've never not been a Harley guy. I've just never been overly attracted to their products. I have had a lot of fun. One of the motorcycles I rode a lot in high school was my stepdad's Sportster 1200. I would have loved to have bought that bike from him and done to that bike a little bit of a, what was it, the FTX CR kind of a vibe to it, kind of build a little bit of a more of a modern American style cafe racer out of that bike. There's something about that look for Harley that always did something for me. Again, I'm not a Harley guy, like chopper guy, but I am Harley Sportster, Evo Sportster guy, air-cooled Harley. That's kind of where I'm at. If I had an opportunity to build one, I probably would jump on it. But guys, I got to tell you, my Bonneville is really scratching the itch for a bike like that. It's lighter, it's quicker. It's a more well-rounded bike, but it just doesn't have the look of the Harley. And there's just something about a cafe'd Sportster. I don't know why, it just does something for me. Maybe it's because in my head, for whatever reason, I've got this Bonneville versus Sportster kind of thing. Like, that's where my brain stopped. You know what I mean? Like, that's where my head just kind of quit worrying about everything else that came from those manufacturers. And it was just, is it a Daytona? No. Is it a Bonneville? No. Or, is it a Sportster? It's not. I don't really see the point. But anyway, that's really the bike that I like the most. So if I ever were to buy a Harley, that's what I would turn it into. Now that's about as far as I can take cruisers. Now let's talk about the problem child right now, which is my Triumph Thunderbird. Got a Thunderbird 1600, and it is driving me absolutely crazy trying to science out what in the world is going on with this bike. So what it's going to end up taking is, unfortunately, I'm going to have to pull the bike apart. I'm going to swap ignition coils side to side and see if I can replicate a failure. The problem, though, is that you've got to disassemble the motorcycle to get to this. The work that I need to get done should only take 45 seconds, and then put everything back together the way you found it, and then fire it up and see if it fails. And if it fails the way that I'm hoping that it fails, then I'll know exactly what I need to buy to replace it. Unfortunately, that's going to be expensive, but listen, that's the game we play, boys. And so you got to pay to play. And I really like riding that bike. For me, cruisers are kind of weird. And that's the other thing. I don't consider the Sportster a cruiser per se. I know you can build one into that, but I always saw it more like the Bonneville. But the whole cruiser thing, I like it, but I'm still trying to get my head around it a little bit. And let me tell you one of the funny things about the T-Bird. By the way, when it runs well, it runs really, really good. In fact, if you're cruising down the highway, you'd never know that anything was wrong with it. But one of the things about cruisers that I've discovered that I have to be careful about is that my corner entry speed is not going to be the same on the T-Bird as it's going to be on like the Katana. I have found myself, I have drug peg, I've damn near drugged frame on that bike. And I mean sparks and gouging and everything, because the bike, you will run out of frame. You'll run out of lean authority with that bike far before you'll run out of that bike being able to do what you're asking it to do. And so the other day, man, I had that bike out, and I am one of these kind of guys. I mean, and we're all out there. I mean, anybody that rides these things, or rides fairly aggressively, you just find yourself doing this. It's a left-hander, and I'm looking through the corner, and for whatever reason, I'm not on the T-Bird in my head. I'm on motorcycle, and I literally start dropping. I'm kind of hanging ass off this thing, rolling into the throttle, and I hit the peg, and my foot comes up off the peg. I'm dragging pretty much everything you can drag except the pipe, and I'm running out of real estate in the road. And anyway, so I'm chopping throttle, just lean into it and just maintain throttle, just kept looking way through the corner, total clear shot too. And this thing is just ripping everything. Get the bike to where, in fact, it looked like I'd done an outside in approach, because I came outside. I was going to dive in and basically do a J hook on this thing, and ended up going out because I was coming in way too hot. Just roll into the throttle, and the bike just kind of does one of these things coming out of it. It's a lot of fun. And when I find myself doing that with that bike, and it's so endearing. And this is, again, one of those scenarios where I know that what I'm doing is dumb, but the fact that I'm riding the way that I'm riding is probably not altogether, that some of that's going to be frowned upon, but it's like what I'm doing it on makes it even funner. So anyway, DM saying, I love the 93 Harley Davidson Fat Boy, but they had a few problems that year. I think you're right. They did. There was a point in time, like in the early to mid 90s, I think they were having issues. Also struggle with cruisers dragging parts. Man, it's funny because I've only drug peg on the Bonneville a couple of times there's a right-hander that I will hit kind of hard with that bike. And here's the thing. I'm on those, what are they, Road Tech 01s on the Bonneville, the Metzler Road Techs. Here's the funny thing. So I was talking about grinding pegs on cruisers or, like standards. I actually, like, people talk about, in DM, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The Bonneville has standard controls. And so I'm more off the bike. I'm looking through a corner, and I'm on those, the Metzler Road Techs. They get really hot. like super hot and sticky. And so when I've done the review videos on that bike, I'm like, guys, these tires are really good for this bike. Take the hint. If you're into those types of motorcycles, the Road Techs are really good because you can get pretty spirited with a bike like that on tires like that, and they work great. So I'm also running Metzler's on the T-Bird. And as a matter of fact, you really can't see it on these shoes so much. A little bit on this one. So there's a right-hander. So sport bike guys will talk about, oh, I'm dragging knee and all this other stuff. This is not going to come up on film. This part of that shoe, if you can see, it's discolored all right here. So I'm able to hit faster right-handers just because of where I live. But some left-handers too. I drag heel with that bike. And so where other guys would be dragging their knee on a sport bike, cruiser guys are dragging heel on forward control bikes. And I know that when that heel starts dragging and I start feathering material off of the sole of that shoe, or this other one too, it's typically on a right-hander. Well, it's actually both, but I mean, I drag more on right-handers for whatever reason. Again, probably for the speed of it. This one you don't really see as much. Anyway, yeah, I drag heel with that bike quite a bit, which makes it fun, like I say. But I guess if you're into cruisers, I don't really know all of the right terms for some of these bikes. But power cruisers for me have always been the ones that I was more attracted to. As long as they've got forward controls, for me, that's what I'm looking for with a cruiser. I'm not a big fan of some of the cruisers that have more standard controls always feel a bit more, I don't know, awkward going down the highway for me. I don't know. I guess it's how how you're sitting on the bike and how the handlebars feel. I'll tell you, for a good bike to put this into perspective for is the Rocket 3. The Rocket 3 with standard controls for me does not feel right. It feels like you're sitting on top of a whiskey barrel. Whereas if you've got your forward controls, it feels very good. And it feels like I really do believe like it handles better. At least it feels like it handles better for me with the forward controls. But yeah, we're dragging shoes over here for sure on cruisers, treating them like they're sport bikes. So that's always a fun thing. But yeah, and the other class of bike that we'll be talking about on this channel, I'm sure quite a bit, are the adventure class bikes. I got to tell you, I would have never, ever thought in a million years that I would be interested in those bikes for any reason. The sport adventure, sport touring type of a bike, or whatever you're calling stuff like the Tiger, and like anything like that, dual sport bikes. Until I rode the Triumph Tiger 850. And guys, there are two bikes that I've ridden. You hear that one? Somebody with their thumper. There's two bikes that I've ridden that basically reset in my head what it's like to have fun on a motorcycle. That is the Tiger 850 and the Tiger 900. Don't let the proximity there of that displacement fool you. The 900 is more powerful, and it is faster. But the 850 feels more nimble, and once you get them on the highway, they're practically indistinguishable. What I'm talking about and why I'm kind of gushing about those bikes is that when I rode the 850, I was surprised by how easily that bike wanted to cruise between 90 and 100 miles per hour. That bike, you park it at like 95 miles per hour, move the screen up like 1 or 2 notches if you want, but you don't have to. And the way that the suspension is set up on that thing, it's like a sport utility vehicle going down the highway. The 900 has a little bit more advanced electronic suite. It's got the electronic suspension. There's a lot more going for the 900. So if it's in the budget and you're looking for a motorcycle like that, then the 900 would probably be the smart play. But damn, either way you go, you can't go wrong. The 900 would just out accelerate the 850. But here's the funny thing. The 900 doesn't particularly feel faster. It just kind of is. Whereas the 850 feels more nimble and feels more at home in like a commuter type of a environment. And don't make any mistake, the thing will accelerate pretty hard, all things considered. Sovereign's in. What's up, man? Made it just in time. We're about to shut down here in about 4 minutes. But of the bikes that, how do I say this? Of the bikes that I've ridden that had made me seriously consider buying something that I would never have bought before, those are the bikes that did. And I got to tell you, I can see why they are catching on as much as fast as they have been. We just finished RSBN, Prayers for the Nation. Prayers for the Nation. Make sure I didn't miss any other comments up here before we start wrapping it up. So guys, that's the first Moto chat. Again, pretty disorganized. I get it. We did not, I didn't put together a monologue. I didn't put together a topic for this one. Typically, the way the live shows work, if you're new and you're watching this, is I'll have a bit of a monologue. I'll start the show off. I'll give a topic. I'll say, hey, this is what we're on about. This is my thoughts on, and then I'll give something. And then I'll let folks start to climb into the window a little bit, and then I'll start hanging out with you guys, answering questions, and we can start talking about whatever you guys want. So, but that's typically how the live shows work. And then from there, it'll just kind of go on. And the way that all this stuff is obviously unedited. I'll just start talking about stuff. Sometimes I don't ever shut up. It's like you would think I'm getting paid by the syllable. I wish that were the case, but it's not. And again, any support always is very much appreciated, but I'm just happy to hang out, and I hope you are too. So with that, guys, I'm going to make sure that I didn't forget anybody, and then I am going to wrap it up. So I'm going to say, didn't see Eric on tonight. Eric didn't make it on tonight. So he probably has some much more interesting things that he's up to. But we will see him on the next one. Yeah, I bet he's just busy. And Sir Franklin saying, love to see motorcycles on topic every Tuesday from now on. Yes, Sir Franklin, we're doing Two-Wheel Tuesdays moving forward. So again, if you've got stuff you want to talk about, let me know. If you're excited about something, share it with us. I want to be excited too. If you've got something new that's up and coming that you want to get out there and let us all know, man, educate me. I want to know. This show is just as much y'all's as it is mine. So be a part of it. And don't be shy. And with that, guys, I got to wrap it up. Listen, guys, we ain't getting away from this. Get out there and do something cool for somebody, because chances are they need it way more than you know. And with that, that's a wrap. We'll see you guys on the next one. That's a wrap.